Okay, so our video has begun recording. Let me get my little drawstring out of the way. And let me make sure that we are focused. We're good to go. So as you are working, you're gonna need a number of things. So in front of me, I have all of these materials. This is your jumbo charcoal. I probably won't need this today, but this is just basically a really thick piece of vine charcoal. And so this is what a normal piece of vine charcoal looks like. This is jumbo charcoal. So it's really, really big. You are usually going to buy it just as one stick instead of the vine charcoal that, you know, is this size. It normally comes in a box of 4 or 8 pieces. And so we're probably not going to use this today, but I have it just in case. So here's what you're going to get started with. This is your vine charcoal. As we heard in the video, charcoal is made of wood. So it's basically burnt wood. And so it's been charred, so all of the oxygen and all the water is removed from it. So it's just this really dehydrated piece of burnt wood. And so if you've ever had a campfire before and you have, you know, found that you were taking the soot and maybe drawing with it the next day, you were basically drawing with charcoal. Vine charcoal does not have anything added to it. So it's just this burnt wood. So it's not very dense. It's really airy. It's really lightweight. And when you draw with it, you're going to find that as a material, it's really light. It's going to leave a lighter mark. It's going to brush away easily. It's going to erase really easily. And so it's a really great type of charcoal to start any drawing with. And so what we'll do is for each of these forms, you are going to begin with this, and then you're going to fill in the darker areas with your charcoal pencil and with your compressed charcoal stick. And then just to clarify as well, this stick comes in this box. And so I bought a box of 12, and I bought the hard vine charcoal. I think that I asked you to buy the medium charcoal. Really any vine charcoal will do. They have soft, medium, and hard. And I think that the medium is probably the most versatile one for artists. But if you got the soft or the hard, you're totally fine. They'll all work. Now, in addition to that vine charcoal, you are also going to need to have compressed charcoal. Compressed charcoal comes in a stick like this, which looks like a block. And I'll show you, you know, here's a, oops, sorry. Here's a bigger piece of that block. So it kind of, you know, literally has these angular edges, and, you know, it's very dirty. When I, you know, touch it with my fingers, it immediately gets on my fingers. And then the other type of charcoal that you have is this charcoal pencil. Now, the charcoal pencil is also compressed charcoal, but it's just in pencil form. So you have to imagine that little round of charcoal that's, you know, all the way through this pencil. So it's the same way that a graphite pencil would, you know, be used for drawing. You would use this the same exact way. And both of these compressed charcoals are going to give me a much deeper, much richer mark as I'm working. And you'll find that to be pretty readily apparent immediately when you use this material. It is actually kind of difficult to get a really light mark out of this because it will just so easily lay down a really thick, rich, deep, kind of velvety black color, black tone to it. Additionally, I do have 2 erasers. So I have my kneaded art gum eraser, or I'm sorry, my kneaded eraser. This is what that eraser generally looks like. And it's kneaded because you can really basically erase with it and then knead that material into the eraser and have a fresh new surface to work with. So it's a really versatile eraser. It's especially great for pinching to get a really thin little piece to your eraser, and then you can kind of use that to just pick up a tiny little spot. So the same way that we saw in that video, or that we learned about how artists would, you know, in history would use bread to, like a kneaded eraser. So they would squish the bread to make a little tiny thin edge that they would use to remove some of that charcoal. And so this kneaded eraser will function the same way. Now, additionally, I also have my art gum eraser. The art gum is great because it can just really pick up a lot really effectively. And so these 2 erasers together work really well. You've got This one can really get a lot of surface area, cover a lot, pick up a lot. And then this is really great for getting really nice little edges and creating nice little highlights, or going in there and just kind of daubing the paper to pick up just a tiny bit of material. Now last, I do have my artist tape. You should by now you should have an artist board, and so you should be taping your paper to your artist board to work. And so what I'll talk to you guys a little bit about today is just using that tape and ripping it into 4 pieces. And then what I want you to think about is just taping those 4 pieces onto the corners of your paper. And those taped corners are how you can affix your paper to your drawing board. And so you should definitely be, doing that by now, and you should be using this specifically artist tape that I told you to buy. And the reason for that is that this artist tape won't leave any gummy residue, and it will really come off easily, so that you won't be tearing your paper or doing any kind of damage to your paper as you're finishing up your work. Now, let's go ahead and get started. As I said, the only time that you're using a pencil in this work is you are going to just really lightly draw a few lines on your composition to divide your paper into 6 squares. And so gridding your paper like this helps you lay out these 6 exercises that you're gonna do. And what ends up being really effective is that you end up with your exercises on one piece of paper altogether, so that if you ever wanna show someone this work, you have this in your portfolio, and it's really a portfolio ready piece of these exercises, as opposed to them being in your sketchbook and being, kind of separate. And so we're gonna work on all of them together like that. And so I'm gonna go ahead and pull up your first image. We're gonna start with the sphere because that's what I've got right here. And I'm gonna start with my Vine charcoal. Now notice it's actually quite easy to break. And I'm gonna tip the camera up a little bit now that I showed you guys those materials. It's really easy to break this. And so what I find is I will break this. I don't wanna break it over the paper because it'll create like some little extra dust. And I just don't want that to get on the paper, but I'm gonna break it into a smaller piece because it's just a lot easier to hold in my hand and draw with, as opposed to using, that really big kind of formidable piece. And as I'm working, I'm gonna hold it like this. I'm not gonna hold it like a pencil. So if you think about how you would hold your graphite pencil, you're not gonna do this. You wanna hold it like this. So pinch the end, and then lay your other 3 fingers down to support the back end of the charcoal. Now the 3 lines that I drew are about right here, and then bisecting the paper horizontally in half. And so what I have is boom, 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 boom. 6 squares to start in, and I'm gonna start in the upper left-hand corner. Let me make sure my paper is taped down before I get started. And when I get started, what I'm gonna do is really lay out just the basic shape of this sphere first. And so, one thing that this does in terms of kind of a fun challenge is it challenges you to be able to draw a circle, right? Leonardo da Vinci famously said that one of the hardest things to do as an artist is to just draw a circle perfectly. And so I'm just kind of in a sketch-like fashion. I'm drawing that circle just really generally, laying down that form. And then what I can also begin to do is lay out that shadow as I see it. And I do want you guys to each draw the works that I posted. If you want to draw something different, you can. But please run it by me first, because I do want to just make sure that you're all, being appropriately challenged for the project. And so this is a good way to ensure that. Now, once I do that, I'm actually going to lay out a pretty substantial amount of charcoal. And I'm actually going to break this again to make it an even smaller piece so that I can really lay out A lot of charcoal. And this base of light charcoal is basically going to function as the light shadows and the medium tones. And then I'm going to go in with my darker charcoal and get all those darker tones. And so it really doesn't take a ton of pressure to lay down all of that. And notice how as I'm working in a sort of circular direction because I want to be laying down those, I want to be laying down that value in the direction that the shadow falls and in, you know, whatever direction my form is. And so because this is a shadow, by laying these, you know, by visually laying out these subtle shadows and values, by laying them out in a circle, I'm kind of reinforcing that form. Now, also one thing that I do want to point out is that I'm standing while I'm doing this work. I know that for many of you, your impulse is probably to sit while you're doing this work, but I want to encourage you to stand. It is super duper important to make sure that you are, you know, really using your tools to the, you know, best of your physical ability. And so really having the most mobility with your arm, being able to really move around is super important. And you're really going to be able to do that a lot more and work a lot more aggressively, work a lot faster if you're standing. Now I'm just going to go in with my fingers and blend this all together. You can use a blending stump if you want, and notice how I'm leaving this little spot right here blank because that's my highlight. And now onto the compressed charcoal. So here's, look at how easy it was to lay down that really dramatic, really rich shadow. Now I'm laying down multiple areas at once, and then I'm going to go back and basically blend them all at the same time. And what you're going to find is the compressed charcoal, it holds a line a little bit more than the vine charcoal. So the vine charcoal really blends very easily. The compressed charcoal, like I laid down that line for the edge of the shadow, and you know that line is just going to be a little bit you know, harder to blend. I can do my you know, I can use my blending stump for it, but generally it just doesn't blend quite as easily, quite as readily. You know, compressed charcoal generally tends to stick to paper a lot better because it has binder in it. And so as you're working, you want to make sure that you're laying down your compressed charcoal in a way where you are, you know, happy with that result visually. Some of those lines might stay. You might need to work a little more aggressively to blend those lines. Now, this is also basically work that Drawing 2 is finishing up right now, but they're using color. So they're doing the same kind of exercise, but with color. And if I want to get in there with this blending stump, it's really easy to just use the corner of the stump. And the nice thing, I mean, it's, you know, nobody has a finger that's this pointy. So, you know, your blending stump can get into areas that your finger can't reach. And can really, you know, basically address edges that your finger wouldn't be able to address. Now, the subtlety of the transition of this really rich, sharp edge here into this really rich shadow, that's part of the cast shadow of this object, is really important. I really want you to focus on that. This cast shadow is really deep and rich right here at the base of the sphere. And notice how that reflected shadow in there is really, really, really light and gives us that sense of the light from the surrounding surface area reflecting up onto the sort of underside of our sphere. And then that's juxtaposed by this really lovely, rich, dark, you know, crisp edge right along here. Now I'm left-handed, so it's like harder for me to hold this with my right hand. So I'm gonna try. And then this is where it's also good to have your, so then my charcoal pencil, I actually can hold like a pencil, or if I were doing something more gestural, I could hold it kind of looser and from further away. But because I really want to get in there and get this really nuanced detail, I'm going to go in there and hold it like a pencil. And if you want to leave, so when you blend the charcoal, it'll inevitably go from that really rich black to just a slightly subtler, still really rich velvety black, but it won't be quite as dark. And so if you want to leave just a little bit of that pencil line, just to, or that, you know, charcoal pencil line, just to give you that really rich black, you can totally do that. And I'll actually draw a little bit, carry that over into here. And now notice how I'm holding this pencil differently as I'm, you know, using the flatter end of it to get that shadow that's a little bit further away. And then using a little bit more compressed charcoal to kind of get that middle area of that shadow to be a little bit richer, a little bit deeper. I definitely want you guys to draw these shadows. Don't hesitate to incorporate them into the work. Give these forms that you're working on a ground. Now, sometimes I like using the pencil, but sometimes I get a lot more control with the square charcoal, with this compressed charcoal stick. And so using both to your advantage is great. I especially love these crispy little edges that happen when you break part of your compressed charcoal. leads to some really very lovely effects that you can get. I'm just going in with my finger, blending these areas a little bit, creating some subtlety in that transition from the deepest, richest shadows to these gradually more subtle areas. Even carrying some of that up even further. I'm gonna go back in with my blending stump and just get this edge right along there. It's actually kind of difficult to do some of these demos because I want to stick my face right up in this drawing and I can't, because then I'll block the video camera and you guys won't be able to see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this sphere. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my, first my art gum eraser, and I'm just going to go around and those really subtle marks that I made at the beginning with my vine charcoal, I'm just going to clean those up so that I get a nice crisp edge here. There's some lines that are sitting a little bit outside of the, you know, perimeter of the sphere that I established that I just want to clean up. And then if I need to go in with my kneaded eraser, I can go in as well. But I'm going to use the edge, and I'm just using this long edge of this one and just really running it along the edge of the circle to clean all of that up. Oop, did I move the camera? Sorry, guys. Okay, and then if you need to get in there with your art gun, you can do that as well. And when you're blowing away these little pieces, I would just be really careful to blow them away, or you can also kind of brush them a little bit just with the edge of your finger. You know, just like that. I don't want to touch the drawing itself, but just kind of getting in there, getting those away like that. And then if you need to, let's say that you blended and you like forgot to give yourself a highlight, you can go back in with your kneaded eraser and kind of smudge some of that away to give yourself that highlight. And so I can actually kind of move the highlight up a little bit. There we go. And so the kneaded eraser is great for going in there and just anything that you have to blot away is super duper easy using the sky. Okay, so I'm going to erase the rest of this and then we'll do the square together, or I'm sorry, the cube. And then I will do a separate demo outside of class that will be the other 4 objects. And I'm just going to pick a coffee mug from my cupboard for my miscellaneous object. But that demo will be one of those really fast-paced time-lapse videos, just so that you can see me working on the other shapes, but it'll only be like a 30-second video when it's done. little smudges happen, if you, you know, if that happens, just go in there and erase it. It's no big deal. Now, the other thing that I do have handy is this cloth, and I can just use this to wipe my hands off as I am working. And what I would definitely recommend is having, you know, maybe even 1 or 2 around. You might want to use them for blending. You might want to use them to wipe your hands off. And the other thing that I'm going to do, that I normally do, I actually forgot to do it for this demo, but I would normally have a wet paper towel at my workstation as well, and that would help me wipe my hands off if I need to, like, you know, because I still have a lot of charcoal on these 2 fingers, and so I can't, you know, I can't really efficiently wipe away this eraser stuff. So I'm just kind of stuck really slowly putzing with this. So now, the other thing that we haven't talked about yet, but we will talk about it probably on Wednesday, is spray fixative. So I'm probably gonna have to ask you guys to buy a can of spray fixative. And the reason for that, if we had been meeting in person come October, we would have had access to a can of spray fixative in our classroom. Because we don't, what I'm going to do on Wednesday is I'm going to talk you through how to use spray fixative, where to find it. It's really straightforward. You can buy it at the art supply store. And what it does is it helps your charcoal affix to your paper so that you won't have any issues come, you know, at the very end of your drawing when you, like, you know, really want to frame it or you really want to keep it safe. And so spray fixative is a great way to preserve your drawings, to specifically preserve the media that you're applying to the paper so that it doesn't fall off or get smudged or anything like that. So, but we'll talk more about that on Wednesday. Okay, so I'm good to go. I'm gonna get started on my cube. Now, of course, we were just working on this really round form, and so a cube is, you know, inevitably gonna be a slightly different challenge. So I'm gonna go on to my next little marked area of my paper here in the middle. And for the cube, the thing that becomes really challenging is this thing called foreshortening for a cube. So, and specifically this cube that I'm gonna have you guys draw. So what I'm gonna do, I wasn't planning on teaching you about foreshortening until we got to the figure part of the semester, but I think it's actually gonna be more helpful for you to know about it now instead of only learning about it later. And so foreshortening is basically your ability to illustrate an object that is moving dramatically back in space as opposed to just kind of gradually moving back in space. And so that example of the Venus of Urbino by Titian is a really great example. The way that they explained how Titian had used modeling to describe the way that her leg really sharply and dramatically goes back in space through the use of modeling, through the use of shadow. And so you're gonna do something similar with this cube. So I'm gonna go ahead and just get started again with that vine charcoal. Because the shadow of the cube goes this way, I'm actually gonna lay it out to start pretty much right here so that it's pretty close to my circle. And what I'm doing right now is I'm working out the lines of the cube. So whereas before, you know, with a sphere, you're talking about this really round organic thing. Now we're talking about something that is very geometric, very angular. For some reason, my vine charcoal is being a little bit stubborn. And so I'm just being really, you know, very gestural. And the nice thing about being so gestural is that if anything doesn't seem right, I can really easily and really quickly correct it. So like, for example, even just now, you know, looking at this line in relation to this line and being able to really correct for that. Now, the other thing that's going on here that is related to foreshortening that we haven't learned about yet is linear perspective. And so I'll go over that really, really briefly with you right now, but we're not actually going to formally learn about it until later. So linear perspective is when you get this illusion of shape, illusion of space and illusion of depth in an architectural drawing by establishing a horizon line and a vanishing point, and then having all of the lines of your geometric forms of a building, for example, all converge into that vanishing point on your horizon line. Now, we haven't learned any of that vocabulary, so I know that all sounds really vague right now, but suffice to say, in this particular cube, what makes this believable is that this line and this line of these two sides converge on a vanishing point. And then these two lines converge on a vanishing point. And we're going to learn that more in depth, so you'll be really, really well versed in it. But suffice to say right now, what you want to be doing is you want to be working on establishing these two lines as if they were going to eventually intersect, and then establishing these two lines as if they were eventually going to intersect. And that when you do that successfully, you're going to create this illusion of depth and this illusion of this, you know, three-dimensional object in your composition. Now, I expect this to be challenging. I don't expect you guys to do perfectly on this. Once we get to our actual, you know, chapter on linear perspective, you will be working really, you know, rigorously to understand that technique. So for now, it's more important that you're just, you know, really establishing this form, really exploring form three-dimensionally, and really working on using value to help us understand the dimensionality of this cube. And so I established the form itself. I'm going to go ahead and lay out the shadow. And I'm going to let this shadow, I'm not going to make it quite as big as it is in the example, but I am going to let it, you know, begin to verge over into this area. And then I'll figure out which form I want to draw right here so that these three forms at the top will all, you know, have an equal amount of space. And then once I get this laid out, I'm going to figure out where my highlight is. It's up here at the top. And then I have this kind of area of shading on this edge that is, you know, kind of a gradual range of midtones. Using both hands here. My right hand is super awkward. And again, I'm pressing relatively lightly, so I'm not getting a ton of value here. I'm just really starting out with like this really gradual tone and then pressing a little bit harder, letting it be a little bit lighter up here towards the top. I don't know what. I'm gonna find charcoal. It's a little bit this lay down. Okay, this is going much better. Slightly darker here, lighter here, and then I'll eventually, once I lay this down with the vine charcoal and just get a general sense of this, so I'll make it a little bit darker right here, then I'll come back in with my compressed charcoal and I'll make it that really, really rich black. And notice how I'm using the edge of the vine charcoal to basically run against the edges of this geometric shape. Now this paper does not have quite as much tooth on it as the paper from the demo. So you'll remember that that charcoal demo, that the paper that the artist was using was this really rough paper that really picked up all of that texture. If you bought the right paper, you would have a paper that has like a medium amount of texture to it. So not too light, but not too dark, or I mean, I'm sorry, not, you know, no texture at all, but not a ton of texture either. And that's the most versatile paper. That's the best for this course in general, because it's going to allow you to use a lot of different media on it, including charcoal. Now I'm only going to use the lightest amount up here, and I'm going to leave it white at the end over here because I want to retain that for my highlight. Okay. Now that I got that done, I'm going to go ahead and be super aggressive with this black charcoal and really establish some really crisp, pretty geometric lines. Again, notice how I'm just using the edge of the charcoal to help me establish these lines here. It's pretty fun, actually. Laying down a lot of material all at once. And I'm noticing that the shadow here is actually a little bit darker than the object, than the cube itself. And so I'm gonna go ahead and establish that dark shadow along both edges there. And then I'll go back in and I'll make, you know, this area darker, but it won't be as dark as the shadow itself. Whereas, of course, along here, up here, here's where I have the darkest part of the shadow within my actual form. And then it gets pretty dark up here too. And what I want you each to do is I want you to go ahead and draw the shadow, but you don't have to don't worry about the rest of the background. Then going in with my finger, blending, playing. This is a really playful experience. And the nice thing about charcoal is because it's a relatively fast process, it's a relatively fast medium to work with. If you mess up and you're not happy with it, just start over. Get out that blending stump for that little edge there. Now, one of the other things that I'm doing here is I'm being really careful to not lay my hand directly on what I just drew. So I'm actually propping my elbow further down my drawing here. And then I can use my other hand to kind of support my arm as I take that blending down into there, down into that shadow. I want to make sure I'm not blocking your view with my head. And kind of coming back in there, sharpening that edge up with my charcoal and with the blending stump. Now, one thing I'm also doing as I'm doing this demo is I'm actually moving all around. I think if you're watching the one view from my laptop, you can actually see me walking around the paper. So I'm not just staying in one place. I'm standing I'm walking around, even just for these studies. And so you can imagine, you know, for a bigger composition, you want to really have the versatility to move around a lot. And then I'm going to go in with my charcoal pencil. And just really lightly and clearly establish those crisp, clean shadows. Okay. Now, this middle area, I'm going to go ahead and lay down a little bit of this charcoal here. And I'm just really, I'm not even pressing down. I'm just like, just really, really lightly rubbing that charcoal around to get that just really subtle tone. And then I can use my finger to blend it. And then I'll do the same thing where I'll go in along the edges with my blending stump, just to make sure I'm getting those edges nice and crisp. And then I won't even touch the top part with this darker charcoal because I really want to retain that lighter quality to the shadow up here. So I'm just going in with a little bit more of that vine charcoal. And then if you add a little too much and you need to go in to erase it, easy peasy to do with your kneaded eraser or with your art gum. And when I use the kneaded eraser, I'm literally just kneading it a little bit and then really just pressing it on the drawing. And that'll pick up some of the material. And then you can, you know, go back with your fingers or your blending stump and resolve whatever is left over there to get it just right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start erasing some of these sides. Now, here's the other thing. When you lay down this really rich amount of charcoal, you're going to have a lot of charcoal dust. One thing I would actually recommend doing is waiting and actually taking your drawing outside if you can and blowing it off outside. If you blow it off indoors, what you're going to end up with is you're going to have all this charcoal dust on your table or on your floor. And so I would recommend and that's actually what I do. So at the end of every demo, I've been like taking my work outside and blowing it off. So that's what I would recommend doing for you guys as well. So what I'm gonna do to wrap this demo up is I'm gonna erase these edges and really get those nice crisp lines. I'm gonna go in a little bit more with my charcoal pencil and just crispen up this little edge here. Things that I wanna point out, notice how along here I have just a really subtle highlight. I'm gonna keep that because that's what is in, because I have that in this example. So I wanna keep that little highlight, little subtler light area here. The extreme highlight of the cube is right here. And if I actually were asking you to do the background is this much denser, darker grayish color that really helps offset that highlight and makes that stand out. Because we don't have that, I am gonna keep a line right here for the cube, but if you were establishing that background, obviously that would be doing the work for you. And so I'm gonna clean this up really briefly, but I'm not gonna blow away all of this charcoal dust because again, I don't want it in my apartment. I wanna blow it off outside. So just really cleaning up that edge, using just the edge of my eraser to get that to be a nice crisp line. And because I didn't use my, my compressed charcoal, I used my Vine charcoal, so it's really, really easy to erase. And I might actually, I'm gonna take this outside before I erase here so that I can blow all of this away. Let me get that one more edge at the top. So I'm gonna take the same, oops. I have to stop kicking this tripod. So I'm gonna take the same care and precision to get rid of all of these little eraser nubs. I'm gonna take this outside and kind of just shake it off, blow it off really, really gently to remove this excess charcoal. I'm working flat on a table, so that's part of why it's sitting here. If you are working with your drawing propped up or pinned to the wall, this charcoal will fall off of your drawing more naturally. So all of these little extra bits that I'm gonna take outside and blow away might just be falling off of your drawing naturally. So you might not have as much to worry about. I will include my cleanup for this cube in my very kind of sped up time-lapse video as I, also finish those other items. So you'll be able to see me clean that up and totally finish it. But it's the same cleanup process that I just did for the sphere. So you still have, it's the same thing basically.